It started, as many things do, with something utterly mundane. My husband, George, was in the kitchen fiddling with the coffee machine again. We'd been married for 24 years, and every morning began with his ritual of trying to coax the ancient machine into producing something better than burnt water. I stood by the sink, watching the rain trace soft lines down the window pane, and I was thinking, not for the first time, how I had slowly stopped seeing him. Or maybe how he had stopped seeing me. We were good together. Comfortable, safe, predictable. He kissed my forehead every morning. We talked about our cholesterol levels and the neighbor's terrible landscaping. We shared silence better than most couples shared sex. I thought that meant something once. But that was before Luke came back. I hadn't seen Luke in nearly 20 years. My mother married his father when I was in college. It was a brief, messy union that ended before it really began, but for a time, we had shared a house. Luke was 2 years older, tall and lanky then, with this quiet mischief in his eyes. I'd had a crush on him at the time, harmless, teenage nonsense. He was never really my brother, not in any meaningful way, but the term stepbrother still felt like a faint echo of boundaries we never fully discussed. When he walked into our home that rainy Tuesday afternoon, I felt something shift. George had invited him to stay for a few weeks while he was transitioning between jobs. He was consulting now, some ambiguous tech-related thing, and working remotely while looking for a place in town. It was supposed to be temporary. He was taller than I remembered, broader too. His hair had thinned slightly, but he wore it with a kind of rugged confidence that made the change seem deliberate. He hugged me when he arrived, his arms strong around me, and I felt the heat of his chest through my sweater. It was too long a hug, maybe. Or maybe it just felt that way because I noticed how good he smelled. Clean, sharp, a hint of something woodsy. Not like George, who smelled like liniment and coffee grounds. That night, Luke sat with us at the dinner table, his laugh easy and rich. He remembered little things about me, how I used to read in the stairwell, how I once dyed my hair red on a dare. He looked me in the eyes when he spoke, really looked, and I realized how long it had been since anyone had done that. Something started then. Not a plan, not a seduction, just a flicker. The first touch didn't happen until a week later. George had gone to bed early. He had started doing that more lately, complaining of backaches and dry eyes. I was on the couch watching a documentary I wasn't really interested in. Luke came in barefoot, holding a glass of red wine, and sat down beside me. Too close. "You always watch things with sad music and slow narration?" he teased. I smiled. "It makes me feel cultured." He grinned and leaned back, stretching out beside me, his long legs nearly brushing mine. The wine glowed in the glass like a dark secret. We started talking, and the TV became background noise. He asked about my work. I ran a local gallery, not that George ever showed any interest. Luke asked questions like he cared, like he was listening. And then he reached over to pluck a strand of lint from my sweater. His fingers grazed my collarbone, just for a second, but I felt it in my stomach. That night, in bed, George was already snoring lightly. I lay beside him in the dark, my body tense with something I hadn't felt in years. Not just desire, anticipation. The feeling of being seen as a woman again, not just as a wife, a housekeeper, a fixture. I touched myself quietly, my breath shallow, my fingers slow and tentative. I pictured Luke's hands, his mouth. I came with my teeth pressed hard into the pillow, the guilt only blooming after. Things escalated slowly. Little things. The way he'd lean too close when showing me something on his laptop. How he'd brush past me in the hallway, his hand lightly grazing my lower back. One evening, he walked into the kitchen shirtless, just a towel slung low on his hips. I dropped a glass. He smirked as he cleaned it up and said nothing. The air between us grew heavier by the day. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my best friend. Especially not George. Part of me wanted it to stop. I still wore my wedding ring. I still folded George's shirts and rubbed cream into his sore shoulder every night. I loved him in that dull, enduring way people love their longtime spouses, like loving a room you've lived in too long to redecorate. But Luke made me feel unzipped. Like all the parts of me I'd packed away over the years had come tumbling out, eager to breathe again. The night it happened, it had been raining. Again. George was at his monthly poker night. Luke and I had made dinner, roasted vegetables and salmon. We drank too much wine, laughed too loudly. At one point, I spilled a bit on my blouse and excused myself to change. I didn't close the door all the way. I wasn't thinking. Or maybe I was. I slipped off my top, unhooked my bra, reached for a robe. I heard him behind me before I saw him. "You always wear lace under t-shirts?" I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, watching me with that unreadable expression men get when they're holding something hot and fragile. My robe slipped from my fingers. "I used to," I said, my voice too calm. "Before." "Before what?" "Before I stopped being someone men looked at." He didn't respond, just stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The click of it echoed in my bones. His hands were on me a moment later, hot, sure, trembling just slightly. He kissed me like he was starving, and I was the first bite of bread. My knees gave out, and I let him lower me to the bed, our bodies tangling with the desperate grace of two people who had waited too long. There was nothing slow about it. He pulled my panties down with shaking hands, his mouth trailing heat across my neck, my breasts, my stomach. When he slid inside me, I gasped loud, raw, alive. It had been so long since I'd felt that way. Open. Wanted. Claimed. He moved with urgency, his breath ragged against my ear. I clawed at his back, buried my cries in his shoulder, shattered around him with a force that left me dizzy. When it was over, he stayed inside me for a moment, forehead pressed to mine. Neither of us said a word. The morning after, the air felt heavier. Not because of guilt, at least not yet, but because something had shifted between us, something we both knew couldn't be undone. George was already up, reading the paper at the kitchen table, glasses perched at the end of his nose, sipping his usual oversweetened coffee. Luke came in a few minutes later, hair damp from a shower, wearing the same shirt he'd worn the day before. "Sleep well?" George asked casually, without looking up. Luke smiled. "Like a rock." I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands shaking just slightly. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments across the room. That was all. No wink, no smirk, just acknowledgement. It was maddening and erotic at once, like we were co-conspirators in a crime that had no victim, only consequence. The rest of the day passed in a haze. George was out running errands. Luke worked from the den, typing away on his laptop with that quiet intensity he always had. I tried reading, cooking, folding laundry, anything to feel normal. But nothing about it felt normal anymore. When I passed the den door and caught a glimpse of him, barefoot, legs stretched out, shirt open at the collar, I had to stop myself from going in. I could still feel him inside me. The memory of the night before clung to my skin like perfume. I'd taken 3 showers, and I still felt soaked in him. That night, we didn't touch. George was home, his back aching, his mood short. I made chamomile tea and rubbed his shoulders while he half-watched a news program and complained about the market. Luke stayed upstairs. When George went to bed, I sat on the patio, wrapped in a shawl, letting the cold air clear my head. I heard the soft creak of the screen door a moment later. Luke stepped out quietly, barefoot again, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed me one without a word, sat beside me, and we just listened to the night for a while. "I shouldn't have," I whispered after a while. He didn't look at me. "But you did. And I'm married." "I know. And you're—" He turned his head. "Not really your brother." I looked down at my glass. "But enough to make this wrong." He took a slow sip, then said, "Do you want it to be wrong?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth curled like smoke in my chest. I didn't want it to be wrong. I wanted it to be real. I wanted it again. The next time it happened, it was raining again. Always the rain. Like some twisted blessing. George had gone to visit his sister for the weekend. A short trip, just overnight, to help her with her new television setup. He'd asked if I wanted to come. I told him I needed to prepare for a new exhibit opening. He kissed my cheek, told me not to overwork, and left with his travel bag and that gentle absent-mindedness he'd acquired over the years. Luke and I didn't speak all morning. He worked. I cleaned. The tension between us was unbearable, like a violin string pulled too tight. By early afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked softly on the door of the guest room where he was staying. He opened it, blinking, a little surprised, and before he could speak, I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and pressed my mouth to his. This time was different. Slower. Like an apology and a confession woven into every movement. He undressed me with reverence, his fingers brushing each part of me like he was rediscovering a country he used to dream about. He laid me down on the bed and kissed every inch of my skin like he had all the time in the world. When he slid into me, he took his time. We moved together like we'd been doing it for years. Familiar, intimate, quiet. He held my face as I came, murmured my name against my shoulder like a prayer. I buried my face in his neck and let myself cry, just a little, from something I couldn't name. Grief? Relief? Lust that had nowhere left to go but out? We lay there afterward, tangled and bare, listening to the soft patter of rain against the window. I missed this, I said. He turned toward me. This. Being seen. Being touched like I matter. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. You do matter. I laughed, bitter. To who? To me. It wasn't love. Not yet. But something had started to grow in that dark, quiet space between us. Something more than sex. Something more dangerous. The affair, yes, I was ready to call it that, continued. Carefully. Quietly. Always in the house. Always behind closed doors. We never risked hotel rooms or public places. There was no need for that. We had our rituals now. He'd come to the kitchen at night, when George was asleep. Sometimes I'd meet him in the laundry room in the afternoon, under the hum of the dryer. Once, shamefully, thrillingly, we did it in the walk-in closet while George showered in the next room. It was risky. It was insane. But I felt more alive than I had in decades. My body remembered things it had forgotten. The curve of my own waist, the taste of sweat on skin, the ache in my thighs after hours spent in someone's arms. Luke reminded me of who I had been before I became someone's wife, someone's neighbor, someone's invisible half. There were moments, of course, where the guilt came back. One morning, George brought me breakfast in bed. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee the way I liked it, just the way he'd done when we first married. You've been glowing lately, he said, smiling. I nearly choked on my coffee. Must be the vitamin D, I joked weakly. That night, Luke found me crying in the hallway. You don't have to choose anything, he said, wrapping his arms around me. Not yet. But I knew the choice was coming. I couldn't live in two worlds forever. There was a moment, just after Thanksgiving, that sticks with me. George had fallen asleep in his recliner after dinner, a half-finished slice of pie on the table beside him. Luke and I were cleaning up in the kitchen. The house smelled of cinnamon and turkey and old memories. He handed me a wine glass and our hands touched. I looked up at him. Something shifted in his eyes. Without a word, he reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and kissed me. Soft, slow, not the kiss of someone stealing something, but someone giving something back. That night, we made love in the guest room with the door open, the sound of George snoring down the hall. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt chosen. The seasons shifted. Winter came slowly that year, the air turning brittle and sharp, the sun retreating early each afternoon as if embarrassed to witness what we were becoming. Luke was still living with us. His apartment hunt had conveniently stalled. George hadn't seemed to mind. If anything, he appreciated the company, a man to talk about football with, someone to help shovel the driveway. He even joked once that having Luke around kept me in better spirits. I smiled, nodded, and poured another glass of wine. In truth, I was unraveling in the best and worst ways. I had never thought myself capable of duplicity, and yet I had become a master of it. Every day, I wore two versions of myself. The wife, affectionate, efficient, even affectionate again, as if George's renewed attention was awakening something I'd buried long ago. And the woman I was with Luke. Raw, restless, dangerous. It had become routine. Beautifully, painfully routine. We would pass each other during the day, never touching. But in the quiet folds of the night, he would come to me, or I to him, and we'd lose ourselves beneath layers of flannel sheets and years of repressed longing. We made love like we were trying to erase all the decades between the people we once were and the people we'd become. There were moments I almost told George, moments when his soft smile or the sound of him humming in the garage would pierce me with guilt so bright I couldn't breathe. I imagined the conversation 1,000 times, the way his face would fall, the tremble in his voice, the sickened realization that I wasn't who he thought I was anymore. But every time I thought I might confess, Luke would find me, his hand brushing mine in the pantry, his voice low in my ear as he passed behind me in the living room, and I'd collapse all over again. We hadn't talked about what it all meant. We hadn't needed to. There was something reckless in our silence. As long as we didn't define it, it couldn't break. It couldn't demand things. We were two people suspended in amber, trapped in this strange, suspended affair. Until the ski trip. George's idea, of course. We haven't gone away in ages, he said. Let's do something just the three of us. Like family. Like family. I nearly said no. I nearly screamed. But I said yes. Because that's what you do when you've become a stranger to yourself. You play the part, even when your skin itches with the lie of it. We rented a cabin in Vermont. Quaint, rustic, surrounded by trees heavy with snow. One fireplace. 2 bedrooms. That first night, George built a fire while I made cocoa. Luke brought out an old deck of cards, and we played poker for Peanut M, and as I laughed, truly laughed for the first time in weeks. But something had changed. Luke was quieter, distant. He avoided my eyes. No sly touches. No accidental brushes. He stayed up later than us, reading by the fire. The next morning, when I padded out in my robe, hopeful, I found him already outside, chopping wood. That night, I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and crept to the guest room. The door was locked. I pressed my forehead to the wood and whispered, "Please." No answer. I went back to George, slipped under the covers beside him, and let my tears dry into the pillowcase. The next day, George suggested snowshoeing. I declined, citing a sore ankle. Luke went with him. I watched from the window as the two of them disappeared into the woods, their laughter carried by the wind. They were gone for hours. When they returned, red-cheeked and covered in powder, George looked happier than I'd seen him in years. "I miss this," he said, pulling off his gloves. "I miss us being close." He was talking to Luke, but I felt it like a dagger anyway. Later, Luke cornered me in the kitchen while George napped. Last night, I began. He held up a hand. "I can't anymore. Not like this." The words landed like ice water. "You don't want me?" I asked, my voice thinner than I meant. His eyes softened. "I want you too much." "Then why?" "Because he's not an idiot, and this will ruin him." I turned away. "And what about me? What about what I want?" He exhaled, came closer. "You want more. I can see it. And so do I. But not like this. Not in stolen hours. Not in shadows." He reached out, stroked my cheek. "If you leave him, if you really leave him, I'll be waiting." It was the first time he said it plainly. If. If I leave, not when. That night, I lay awake between two futures. One smelled like comfort and cinnamon and old memories. The other like pine and rain and danger. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't about sex anymore. This wasn't even about Luke. It was about me. After we returned home, something shifted. Luke began spending more time out of the house. He started seeing apartments again. George and I resumed our rhythms. Coffee in the morning, crossword puzzles in the evening. But something between us had changed, too. He touched me more. Complimented me. Watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. I wondered, had he noticed? Or worse, had he known all along? One night, after dinner, as we watched television, George reached over and took my hand, held it like he hadn't in years. Are you happy? He asked, eyes on the screen. I looked at him, really looked. The lines at his mouth, the way his hands trembled slightly now, the way his body had softened, settled. I thought about how much I'd loved him once. Maybe still did. Just differently. I don't know, I said. He nodded, said nothing else, didn't let go of my hand. The day Luke moved out, he left a note. It wasn't long. Just a simple thank you for the hospitality, for the memories, for the honesty between us, however brief. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't have to. I watched his car pull out of the driveway from the upstairs window, my heart cracked wide open, everything raw and uncertain. George stood behind me, his voice low. I think you should take some time, he said. Go to your sister's. Or the beach house. Get clear. I turned, stunned. You knew. He smiled sadly. Not at first. But I know you. I know the way your face changes when you're seen. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I didn't mean to. I know, he said gently. That might be the worst part. I collapsed into him, sobbing. He held me like a friend would. Not a husband. Not yet. You still love me? I whispered. I love what we were. I'm still figuring out what we are. I went to the beach house. Alone. It was a quiet place. Old, creaky floors, salt-stained windows, furniture that smelled like driftwood and sunscreen. George and I hadn't been there in years. I remember packing the same bag I'd used on our honeymoon, noticing how the zipper stuck now. Time does that to luggage, to marriages, to skin and promises. For the first few days, I slept late. Ate when I remembered to. Walked barefoot across the dunes and let the cold air slap the confusion out of me. I thought of Luke constantly. In flashes. The shape of his mouth on my collarbone. The way he'd grab a handful of my hair when he couldn't help himself. The time he cried against my chest and tried to hide it. But I thought of George too. How he used to kiss my forehead when he thought I was asleep. How he knew I needed space before I asked for it. How, after everything, he hadn't yelled, hadn't begged, hadn't broken. He'd just let me go. And that's what stunned me most. That quiet dignity. That grief that didn't demand to be witnessed. Luke called once. It was early evening. I just opened a bottle of wine. Barefoot in the kitchen, the ocean breathing through the open window. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Hey. Hi. It had been 2 weeks since he left. His voice was hesitant but not cold. I wasn't sure you'd pick up, he said. I wasn't either. Silence. Then, I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. But I won't be your secret. Not again. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I know. Another pause. I miss you. I miss you too. And that was it. He didn't ask what I decided. He didn't pressure me. He let it hang. When I hung up, I cried again. Not because I missed him, or George, or the life I'd cracked open with one impulsive night. But because it was the first time I realized that no matter what I chose, something would be lost. You can't unlive what you've lived. You just decide what to carry forward. I returned home 3 weeks later. The house felt smaller. Not emptier, just tighter, like it was holding its breath. George was in the garden, pruning roses. He looked up as I pulled in. Smiled faintly. Not warm, not cold. Just steady. We sat that evening in the living room, each holding a glass of wine. The television was off. The air smelled of earth and winter, and something like surrender. I needed to figure out who I was without either of you, I said quietly. He nodded. I don't expect anything, he replied. But if you want to rebuild something, even just as friends, I'm open. My throat tightened. I don't know if I can be that person anymore. Neither can I, he said. But maybe we can meet each other where we are now. And that was the closest we came to reconciliation. He didn't ask about Luke. I didn't offer. Some things were too fresh to lay bare. A month passed. Then 2. I saw Luke once, unexpectedly, at a gallery opening downtown. I had gone alone, dressed in a slate gray dress that made me feel sleek, sharp again. He stood across the room, near a sculpture of two twisted bronze figures locked in some eternal embrace. He looked good, stronger, cleaner, like time had done him favors. When our eyes met, he smiled. I walked over, took a glass of champagne from his tray. He was helping cater the event for a friend, and let my fingers brush his, just lightly. I wasn't sure if I'd see you again, he said. I wasn't either. Another smile. A real one. We didn't make plans. Didn't declare anything. But we stood together for the next hour, talking about the exhibit, about art, about stupid things, films, weather, food. It was the most ordinary, beautiful hour of my year. When I left, he kissed my cheek. No promises. Just warmth. I eventually moved into a small apartment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even painful. George helped me pack some of the boxes. We hugged in the driveway. I kissed his cheek. We cried, but softly. We did our best, I told him. I know, he whispered. I just wish it had been enough. I think it was, I said. For a while. He nodded. And that was the end of us. Not in hate, not even in heartbreak. Just in quiet acknowledgement of change. Now, now I see Luke sometimes. He comes by with coffee. We walk. We touch each other like we have all the time in the world. We've stopped hiding. Not because we're flaunting it, but because secrets take energy and neither of us have the patience for lies anymore. I don't know what we are. Lovers? Partners? A second chance wrapped in adult caution? But I do know this. What began in heat and recklessness became something deeper. Something earned. And though it cost me something to get here, something I'll never get back, I don't regret it. Not the way his hands made me feel. Not the risk. Not even the pain. Because somewhere between the lies and longing, I remembered who I was. And she was worth rediscovering.